All right, you're on. I'm going to put you on Spotlight and take it away.
Okay. Welcome, everyone, to our Shabbat Tale of Three Cities. In the first 12 years of our marriage, we moved 5 times in 3 cities as follows: 2 years in an apartment on Rainier Avenue, 18 months in an apartment in Carmichael, suburb of Sacramento, California, 8.5 years in Chicago, 1 apartment, 1 house, and then back to Seattle. If anyone would have told us in 1980 that we would be in the same home now in 2020, I doubt that we would have believed them. But here we are, Baruch Hashem, on Holly Street. Shabbat is such a blessed constant in our lives that we've been reminiscing about how we have observed it over the years in quite different places and situations. After all, the only trips we've been taking in the past 5 months have been down memory lane. We want to share some of our memories and hear from you about your experiences.
Well, I was finishing up my PhD in the field of nuclear engineering at the University of Washington. We were members of Yavne, the Seward Park branch of what is now BCMH. At that time, the main BCMH was on 17th and Yesler, and all they had was the Yavne branch. And we see that now, it's a small little building. At that time, Rabbi Zev Eisenstein, who was our cousin, he was married to our cousin, he served as the rabbi and was a teacher at Seattle Hebrew Academy. Although we spent many Sephardic Shabbatot with Esther's parents, we did host some friends from Yavne. One such guest was Sheldon Schreiner, a classmate of mine in the nuclear engineering department, who sadly passed away from COVID in March. We remained friends with Sheldon and his family, and one memorable Shabbat at their home in San Jose, we remember that, in San Jose in the early 1980s before they located to New York. During this time, Esther's parents gave us a small but meaningful gift, a salero. Can you see it? It's a salt dish. And we use it every Shabbat and Yom Tov to dip the bread into the salt. My first job was for the Aerojet General Company in Sacramento, California, working on the Nerva nuclear rocket. Thus, we moved there, and more specifically to the suburb of Carmichael, California, where Josh was born in the American River Hospital. Incidentally, at that time, Reagan was living in Carmichael. He didn't want to live in the governor's mansion. In 1970, there was no Orthodox synagogue in Sacramento, so the best alternative was the Mosaic Law congregation, which was conservative and had been around for many years.
We didn't live there.
We didn't live near there, and Shabbat was kind of experience similar to the pandemic, praying at home. 2 notable exceptions were Sunday morning Shachrit, which consisted of Shachrit, breakfast, and Parsha study, led by an elderly man named Israel Camille, who had attended yeshiva in Poland before World War II. It was also there that I met a man named Joseph Papa, whose great-great-great-grandfather, whose name was Rabbi Eliezer Papa, he wrote the important Sephardic Musar book called Pele Yoetz. I introduced Esther's father, my father-in-law, Sam Ben Zion Lyman, to Mr. Papa, and when they were here, and when they visited us down there, and they had a wonderful time together talking about various topics for long session. The second exception to our solitary Shabbats first actually occurred on our first weekend in California when we traveled to San Francisco. We stayed at the Geary Motel on Geary Boulevard, and I attended Friday night services at the nearby synagogue. A wonderful gentleman named Joseph Levy and his son Renee Levy, they invited us to their home for Shabbat meal, and the rest, as they say, is history. When we were told that Renee was deciding on which professorship to accept between a Big Ten school and the University of Washington, we went into full Seattle and SBH campaign mode. and he made the right choice. Later that summer, the Sephardic synagogue was holding a barbecue, and with Esther's parents visiting us in Sacramento, we drove down and for that barbecue and introduced her parents to the Levy family. A few months before the Levys actually moved to Seattle. We have two distinct memories of connections between San Francisco and our Jewish lifestyle: kosher meat and religious objects. I would order kosher meat from the butcher where Joseph Levy worked, calling them up in the morning, giving in the order, and going to the Sacramento Greyhound bus station in the evening to pick up the package. Second, a few times when I was in San Francisco, I went to a Jewish bookstore, and that's where we bought our hand-washing cup.
First one.
I was laid off from my job in mid-March. The NERVA program was reduced to 1/3 its original size in 1971, and in 1972 was completely terminated. 2 weeks later, after my termination, Josh was born, and in June we moved the family to Chicago, where I had been hired by Sergeant Lundy engineers to work on the design of nuclear power plants.
So here are two Shabbat items that act in a way as bookends to our years in Chicago. The first is a challah recipe and a challah that I've just made. That the recipe was given to me by a dear friend who lived in our apartment building. And sometime in 1971 or 72, she gave me the recipe, which traces back to her hometown of Boston. The second is this challah board and tray, which was given to us and is inscribed on the inside side. It's hard to see, but it says, "From your friends in Chicago," at the end of 1979 when we were about to leave Chicago. We use that every Shabbat. We were early members of a very small Ashkenazic synagogue in West Rogers Park, the name of which was Adas Yeshurun, which grew to be one of the largest Orthodox synagogues in the city of Chicago. When Eugene was president of this synagogue in the mid-70s, the shul hired its first rabbi. A dubious distinction for the wife of the president was the task of washing out the bowls that had held herring, crackers, and the like. Since there was no kitchen, this meant transporting the bowls home and washing them there. Our two children, Neil and Laura, were born in Chicago.
I participated in a class on Shabbat afternoon based on the Ein Yaakov, which was led by one of the rabbis from that shul. We were also associate members of the Portuguese Israelite fraternity, now known as Sephardic Congregation, which was also near our home, and where our cousin, Rabbi Michael Azos, served as the rabbi. At that time, to be a member, one spouse had to have some Sephardic roots. Thus, the only reason we were allowed to join is because my wife is Sephardic.
Right.
They've changed that since then.
Yes, and they also changed the name of the synagogue to Sephardic Congregation. One memorable Shabbat at the Portuguese Israelite fraternity was in July of 1976 when the call celebrated the bicentennial there with a full Sephardic Kiddush. Mike's wife, Bonnie, and I helped with the baking. And as we do at SBH, we left our egos at the door. When we started to add cold water to the bareka dough, a woman stopped us and insisted that we add hot water. We did as we were told, and on the day of the Kiddush, as we were serving the barekas, another woman took a bite and said, "Next time, use cold water." Paciencia.
One Friday evening in March 17th, in fact, because I know that was St. Patrick's Day, and I'm not sure if it was 77, 78, something like that. There was a major problem with the CTA, that's the Chicago Transit Authority. So that's the subway system that went down to the loop near where my office was, and I could take that train from the loop all the way up to the last station, or all the way up to Devon, and then take a bus from there to my home. So it was a train bus situation. But first you had to get onto the train. And I saw there was a major problem with the CTA, with the subway system. The Chicago, all the trains from downtown were halted. There was a fire somewhere, and it was in a very central location, so everything was closed. This is Friday afternoon. I have to get home for Shabbat. What am I going to do? So I ran back to my office to call Esther. I told her I left everything behind in my office except for cash, and I took a stamped envelope with me. I went back down and began looking for a taxi. None was to be found. I spotted a CTA bus going north, which is the direction I wanted to go. But after 20 minutes on board, it had gone 2 to 3 blocks. In other words, because of the trouble with the subway system, everything was really jugged up in downtown Chicago. And so it was a loser. Like I said, I went 2 to 3 blocks in 20 minutes. I saw that was not going to work at all. And so I got off because I thought the only way I'm going to get home, instead of sitting on the bus forever, was to walk. So I got off the bus, began walking, all the while looking for an empty cab. I knew that when Shabbat would start, I knew when Shabbat was close to starting, so I found the mailbox and I mailed myself the envelope with my money in it. Now I had one choice. I got rid of my money. A very long walk. It was 13 miles, and it took me 3.5 hours, but I made it home. Joss was probably up, but maybe Neil, but I'm sure not Laura at that time because she was pretty small at the time. So that's my Shabbat walking story. In 1979, I was told by a former friend from Sergeant Lundy who had gone to work for Puget Power. I was told this at a professional society meeting. He told me that he was getting a new job, so his old job was becoming available. I contacted his boss, I set up an interview, and I got the job here at Puget Power while I'm still in Chicago. I was to start at the beginning of September, so Esther and I had to do a lot of work to find a new house here and sell the old one. Fortunately, the Myman family were celebrating their 55th reunion of when the family had come to Seattle in 1924. They started that in 1974 with the 50th, and then 5 years later, they wanted to do a 55th. It was that particular summer. So we came here with the entire family, and during that time, we began looking for house hunting. Luckily for us, Aunt Ray Ben-Alil, for the rabbi who may not know her, so that's Al's mother. That's Al's mother. She lived right across the street from us. She told us about this house right across the street from her, and we jumped on it. Esther and the kids flew back, but I remained a few days to get all the paperwork sorted out for buying the Holly Street house. The family flew here after a month or so, and we stayed in the basement of Al and Jeannie, and I had to fly back to Chicago to complete the sale. And then I had to drive from Chicago back to Seattle with our car because we needed the car. We remodeled the house a year or two later and did a number of more major renovations over time.
So here we've been since 1980, and you want to hand me the Shabbat tray? So after a few years, Eugene's mother came and joined us, and this is a Shabbat tray that holds our candlesticks every week, and she gave that to us. And Eugene at that time, or around that time, had made the decision to join Sephardic Bikur Holam. So that's where we've been members ever since. And many of the memories of Shabbat here surround the years that my father, blessed memory, spent Shabbat with us after the loss of his wife, my mother. We shared Papu with Al and Jeannie during the week, and as our house is an easier walk to call, a lot of the time he was here for Shabbat, and our children were able to hear lots of stories, lots of singing, lots of wonderful conversation. And now I can't see, but if Neil is on, someone want to tell me if Neil's there?
Neil's there. Yeah, Neil,
Okay.
can you unmute yourself?
You unmute and tell some things about your memories of Papu and Shabbat?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So, right, as my mother said, so that was like, I was probably more my 10, 11 till teenage years.
Mhm.
That right, my papa would spend Shabbat with us. So when my older brother Josh was in high school, so we each had our own room, but when he was still in high school, so my parents had a pull-out bed, so my papa would sleep in my room, and Josh and I would sleep together. So he was always very thankful to me that I went to my room. I remember obviously he knew a lot of the Sephardic Hizmonim and songs, but he also Josh and I went to camp. My parents sent us to Camp Moshe Vaughn, Wild Rose, Wisconsin. So some of the songs that we had learned there, he was also would like to learn. Was excited to hear us bring those songs as well. I mean, I guess a lot of the memories I have is on Shabbat, particularly is kind of walking with him to and from Kal. I guess it was kind of I guess as I look at it more in retrospect, it was just to have that time. I don't necessarily remember so many conversations. My memories of my papa is sort of different than of my parents' generation. Remember him as a much more vibrant with a sense of humor. My memories of my papa, he was older and he had suffered a heart attack a number of years before he passed away, so he wasn't quite as didn't have the same kind of energy, but I really cherish those that time to just going with them to and from college is very kind of a meaningful be able to spend quality time with him.
Okay. What?
All right, Terry's right. Also, he taught Josh and I, and all his grandsons our bar mitzvah parashas, and Musaf, and I remember going. I think when I was 8 years old, he taught me Shir Shirim as well. So, right, and yeah. So now I'm teaching. On my oldest son Shalom, I taught him his bar mitzvah, and God willing, in a few months, Naftali, he's going to be bar mitzvah too. So teaching him as well.
Okay. Thank you, Neil. And would you want to say when Papu was finished at the table, if we would have guests over, or if he was just ready for the dinner to be over, he had 2 words, depending on which grandson he would call. It was Neil Avarecha, or Ash Avarecha.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I was going to say something else, and that is oftentimes when he would be going over either the Shirashim or your Pasha or Josh's Pasha, he's sitting there in the chair with his eyes closed, and he's listening. He doesn't open his eyes one iota. It's all closed, and he knows it all by heart. And if you make a mistake, he'll correct you.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know, is Josh on there? I'm not sure he was able to make it.
Yeah, Josh is on with us too.
Okay, So Josh, do you have anything to add or about Papu teaching you? He was able to teach you some things before his heart attack, right? You went
Yes.
house.
Yeah. Papa's the one who taught me the Zemirot, and he also taught me, among others, the Mikamocha from Shabbat Zachor Purim. I know I had many other people who helped teach me. And I know I did Zemirot over time, and I was able to actually, I guess, master it by within a couple of years. Also, I wanted to add about Papu and vibrancy. If one had heard the Tisha B'Av evening service, that recording is on the SBH website, you hear him very distinctly doing many of the PUT during at night, and he sounds very. He sounded then a lot different than maybe some of my contemporaries or people younger than a certain age who saw him towards the end of his life. That was the one I think that I would like to remember, as well as my parents and my uncle and my first cousins and the others who remembered him from that time.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. One other memory I have, Josh, about I'm not sure if you were in high school or college and you went to help out with Shabbat services in Mercer Island when they were first starting. And Papu, as Dad and Neil said, he would sit in his chair, he would have his eyes closed, but he knew exactly what was going on all the time. And one time you were leaving the house to go to Mercer Island, and I don't know how he knew, but he said, "Josh, don't forget the wine." And sure enough, you had. So those are some of our Shabbat memories. And yes, so, in the last several years, being at SBH and having guests and kids and everything. So we'd like to hear other people's either questions or stories about your time, maybe in different cities and different situations. So we'll open it up. Or not.
Well, I was just saying at the beginning, before we started the recording, that the Rubisa and I definitely can connect to your stories of living all over the world. At the beginning of our married life, we were living in Israel, then we moved to Australia, and I don't think we moved to Seattle. We didn't think we were going to be here 7 years, but Baruch Hashem, it's been very quickly passing by, and seems like it's going to be our long-term home. But I definitely resonated very much hearing those different experiences. And one of the things that we've been basking in celebrating Gabby's bat mitzvah is hearing all of our old friends from Israel and from Australia, seeing the girls bigger now on Facebook and seeing all the videos and the pictures. It brings back a lot of memories. So I definitely, it's sometimes when you're putting all those memories together and thinking about them, it definitely, I loved hearing your stories about in Chicago on all those different experiences. It definitely, we have lots of fun memories of our first Kehillah in Melbourne, and helping together, getting the Kiddush ready was always one of the focal points. So very much.
Right. One other story about Chicago. When we moved there, we were in our mid to late 20s, and I think I see Betsy on here. But when Yossi was getting married, we went to Chicago, and we were going to stay with old friends who had met us when we were about the same age that then Neil and Laura were when we went back for Yossi's wedding. And Neil and Laura got out of the car first, And I think our friend Barry was almost going to have a heart attack because he said, I know Seattle is a nice, fresh city, but you guys haven't aged. Who are these people? Because Laura looked just like I had and Neil looked like Dad. So the people you meet in those situations and who knew your children and everything, that it is, it's very special. Yeah.
I was going to say something else, and that's a little more unusual experience. So before I joined Boeing, when I was still with
Oh yeah.
the electric utility
14
here,
months.
Puget Power. So what happened was that the program, the Skagit nuclear program died, and so they got rid of some people. But if they can loan them out and get money for it, so it was very good. So they were able to loan me out since I had a PhD in nuclear safety. And where did I go? I went to New Jersey. I went to GPU Nuclear, which is the people that brought you 3 Mile Island. That's 3 Mile Island 2 is the one that had the accident. On the island, it's 3 miles long. There's another reactor that's 1,000, 1,500 feet away. That one's still operating. So I worked at that one, and also a reactor, a place called Oyster Creek, which is about 40 miles north of Atlantic City. So what I was doing for about 14 months, I was commuting. 4 weeks I would spend in New Jersey, and then 4 or 5 days I had on the weekend to fly back to Seattle to be with my family, back and forth. It was not for 14 months. And then it got a little better because they placed, that was it, you know, UDCON, that finished. And then they placed me with Portland General Electric. So Portland General Electric, that was in Portland, but I couldn't be there all the time. So what I did is I rented an apartment in Beaverton. So I had an apartment in Beaverton, and I would drive down there Sunday afternoon, 6, 7 o'clock, stay at the apartment until Friday morning. And Friday morning I went to work, and then from work I would drive north to Seattle to be home with the family. And it was, I think I did that for 5 months until, while I was going back and forth to New Jersey, I had an interview through one of my friends from, I had been in graduate school with, and that interview was with Boeing. But he said that, so I came for Josh's bar mitzvah, which was in April. Came there and I stayed here a number of weeks. And during that time, I interviewed with Boeing, and nothing happened. June, July, August, September, once or twice a month, I'd call them up, know what's happening. And so this was in 84. In 83, that's when Reagan had his famous Star Wars speech. And after the Star Wars speech, then he got the Department of Defense working on building new systems, new defense systems, offensive, defensive systems, and that required work by companies like Boeing, aerospace companies. So but it took a while to kick in. So when it finally kicked in, that's when I was able to do that. And then Boeing was hiring. They needed people. And one of the guys I used to work with on my group at the Boeing Radiation Effects Lab, he was the same way. He was hired in November of 84 because that's the time that they were doing it. A lot of it's timings.
Okay.
So we would just like to follow up what's it called? Giving forward, I guess. You showed the challah board that you got from your friends.
Right.
You still use today. And when we lived in Israel, you came to visit us, and you gave us a challah board.
Well,
that we still use today. We've got the olive oil. You can see it's from Israel, but that's it. So I don't know that we ever give anybody. We should give the challah knife. I don't know if we give anybody a challah board. We better get up to it quick.
Right.
One good turn deserves another. Yeah.
Yeah. So Laura sends her best regards, but she's with a friend who had a procedure this morning, and it's taking longer. She just texted me again. So as much as she would love to be here and tell, I'm sure she has her stories to tell about Papu and everything, but this takes precedence. One thing that I know she would tell about Shabbats in Seattle is waiting for Papu and Eugene and the boys to come home, and she would always pretend to be asleep on the couch, so someone would have to wake her up. But another time.
Now, when was it that she accompanied Dad to California?
Oh, yes.
That's an interesting experience.
That was an interesting experience. So that was for Auntie Fanny and Uncle Isaac's Dado's 60th anniversary, possibly. Yeah, in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And so she would have, I think she was 14 years old, and he wanted to be able to attend, for the Shabbat and the party. And so she accompanied him. It was really good. And that's when she heard that Auntie Tucci of blessed memory's real name was Madeline, because one of Auntie's friends picked them up from the airport and kept talking about Maddie this and Maddie that, and she didn't know who they were talking about. But that was a very special for her being a travel companion for Papu.
I guess he couldn't go down being an unaccompanied adult.
Exactly, right, yeah. And I don't know if that was before or after it, but it gave us the idea for him to go spend a couple nights in the hotel when the American Sephardi Federation convention was in Seattle, as an unaccompanied adult. But it made all the difference. He was able to just take an elevator and go up and down. So yeah, that was good.
Another thing I was going to say is that when I was doing this commuting back and forth to New Jersey, on some Shabbats I would go. There was a Sephardic congregation in West Orange,
Right.
and I would sometimes go to that one. Most of the time I went to the Livingston Ashkenazic one, but sometimes I went the other direction to West Orange, and I think there's some people there who are related either to Norman or to Carol. I think more to Carol. But they had a congregation, maybe 25 people, something like that. And I was the only one who had a Turkish connection. Most of them were either SYs or Moroccans or Iraqis, but there was no Turkish one there. So I was the only one who brought some kind of Turkish connection. But it was a long walk, right? That was I think that was a 3-mile walk. So usually then I'd like to have lunch somewhere, stay over till Shabbat was over, and they get driven back because it's a 3-mile walk.
Yeah.
Oh, David Powell, right? David Powell's
David's
parents lived
right.
near there.
Right.
They lived maybe
Livingston.
within a half a mile, I think, their house from the house that I rented.
There.
I rented the house for a whole year because in the summer the whole family came out.
Right.
So they were in New Jersey for 2.5 months, and so we hooked them up with camps. Now the boys did great. They had a camp and they loved it because
Gan Israel.
it's Gan Israel, and but Laura did not like the camp whatsoever. They kind of expected. They weren't sure about her. They weren't first. They asked Esther whether does she speak Hebrew? Does she read Hebrew? Does she read Hebrew?
The reason she went the first day, and they asked her if she had been in yeshiva. So to Laura, yeshiva was high school. So she said no. So then they called.
She said, Ben Sion, my cousin Ben Sion, he goes to yeshiva.
So then they called me up and asked if she knew the alphabet. Yeah.
She knew how to read, but
Right. Yeah.
you know, the heavy-handed New York
Started out a
kind of
little
approach
bit
was
different,
a
right.
little too much for her. So
Right.
after a while, she caught up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So.
But still, I think her brothers had more fun at Gun Israel than she did.
But that's okay.
More ball games. Yeah.
Right. More ball games. Okay.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you very much, Eugene and Esther. This was wonderful hearing all those stories down memory lane. And Shabbat Shalom, everyone, from our Sephardic home to yours. Shabbat Shalom, and we hope to see you again soon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so